As you well know, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, is first for a reason. The single most important right in this nation is the right to speak. As informed citizenry with a strong military background, we too enjoy the right and exercise it to inform national leaders how best to shape our military to meet the national military strategy. We are now in very turbulent times with conflicts worldwide, economic challenges, globalization, and now defense budget cuts. At this time in National Guard history, there is no more important person who can help us voice informed position than that of our keynote speaker.
Mr. President, it is my pleasure to announce the arrival of Major General Retired Gus Hargett, Jr., the President, National Guard Association of the United States.
Sergeant at Arms, please escort Major General Retired Hargett and Major General Tanini to the platform.
Please sit down. I like the way you guys do this. It doesn't go through all that bio and people don't know how old you are. You know, I heard Ed Tanini say yesterday he had 43 years experience, and you can obviously look at the two of us and tell he's the most experienced. He got up here and bragged about all these bets he's been beating me out of, and I got to thinking last night that the University of Tennessee now concentrates on education and not athletics. But it's great to be back in the Commonwealth. You know, having been here last year, and I was thinking, how many of you remember what I talked about last year? I said 2 or 3 of you, yeah. I was trying to remember too, and I couldn't either, but so that's the reason I keep notes when I do stuff like that. And I was thinking when the congressman was up here this morning, I was over on the Hill the other day, and one of the congressmen was talking about the approval rating of Congress, and it kind of floats around in that 12, 15, 16% range. And one congressman said, you know, our approval rating now is 14%. He said, you got to wonder who those people are. So it's an interesting time in Washington, D.C. right now. And, you know, the only thing that disappoints me this morning, and I was here yesterday with all the introductions and everybody was getting announced as a lieutenant general, and I was hoping I'd get that this morning. And I kind of felt sorry for them as they went through this deal about the lieutenant governor versus a lieutenant general. And I was thinking back, and I'm going to defend you a little bit, because a few years ago I had the opportunity to introduce Senator John Kerry at a convention in Las Vegas. And we come out that morning, and the podium is all set up, and it's the podium's about this tall, and you know, I can't see over it. So I look at that thing, and fortunately we got a congressman to come in to speak first, and he's about as short as I am. So they bring this box out for us to stand on. So the congressman does his thing, and so I tell that person, I said, now, you know, I got to bring Senator Kerry back out here and introduce him, so make sure that box is here. So we go backstage, and I talk to Senator Kerry, and we walk back out, and the first thing I see is the box is gone. So I'm standing to that podium, and I'm trying to see over it to look at everybody. And I got these notes that I can't read, and immediately I get nervous. So I kind of understand where you were yesterday. So I walk up there, and I'm on my tiptoes, can't read my notes, and I'm trying to remember what I've got written. And so immediately I introduce him. If you think of John F., you think of John F. Kennedy. So I introduced him as Senator John F. Kennedy. And immediately I knew what I did, just like you did yesterday, but I couldn't correct it. So we get backstage after it's over with, and I look at Senator Kerry, and I said, all I can do is apologize. He said, I thought it was a compliment. So, you know, there are good things and bad things that come out of all of that, but, you know, it is great to be back out here this year and talk about a few of the things that are going on in Washington. And I think last year when I talked to you, I talked about the 3 priorities that I had when I went to Washington, D.C. And I talked to you about membership, working the Hill and what we could do for the legacy of the Guard and to tell the Guard story in Washington, D.C. through the National Guard Education Foundation. So I don't know how many of you read the magazine they put out there yesterday, and I just did a report to what I thought that we had accomplished over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you that we have done wonderful things for the National Guard Education Foundation. We've raised $1.5 million in the last 2 years to go back and redo the museum, tell the Guard story, a memorial for almost 700 Guardsmen who have been killed as a part of OIF and OEF. So we have really done good things with that. We've also created a scholarship fund through a corporation with the DRS Corporation for the children of our deceased Guardsmen as a result of OIF and OEF. We're now awarding $25,000 scholarships to their children. We had the opportunity to do the first one of those last year in Milwaukee to a young man from North Carolina whose dad was a member of our association, a warrant officer aviator. And what a privilege and what a great young man. So those are the things that we can do to give back to those who gave to us. So that's what our education foundation should be about, and to be able to honor those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country, who were Guardsmen. And we will continue to work those and continue to try to do those things. And membership, I'll talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about working the Hill a little bit. But membership, you know, I'm not happy with what we've done with membership, but I'm not totally unhappy with what we've done with membership, because we've been kind of status quo. And if you look around at what other professional associations in Washington, D.C. have done, they have gone the other way. I won't badmouth any other association, but there are a lot of associations up there now that are looking at other ways to raise revenues other than through dues to keep their doors open. There are some of them who have moved out of their building and now lease space to keep their doors open. There are others who want to change the way they do business and allow other people who in the past have not been members of their association to do those things. So we've not had to do that. Actually, our association is in really pretty good financial shape. I think if we go through 2 or 3 more years the way we have done the last few years, we will be talking about going down on dues. And I know that we have not had a raise in dues in about 12 years. So you could say that you have gone down on dues, but we've got the building is leased for about 3 more years now. We don't have any vacancies. We've got a plan to pay the building off in 7 years, and I think we could do that earlier. Then I think that building becomes, it makes us the biggest lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. I think if you watched what's happened over the last few months in Washington, D.C. with putting the chief on the joint staff. Now, how many of you remember me talking about that last year? And I said, you know, I think we can do it in the Senate. I'm not sure we can do it in the House. And as we went into this thing, we had a plan that we thought that we may be able to barter a little bit and gain some things for the Guard. And after it was all over with, I told Senator Leahy's guys the other day, I said, you know, there are a lot of people that didn't think we could do this. And one of them said, yeah, including me. So there were a lot of people on our team who were kind of naysayers and didn't think that we could get there from here. But as we went into this thing, and I remember your tag one time asked me, he said, are you sure this is the right thing to do, and do you think we can do it? But as you got into the thing, we almost realized that if we didn't do it, it became a sign of weakness for the 54 states and territories. And I'll tell you, getting it through the House turned out to be the easiest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I never thought we would get it out there. But then getting it into the Senate and getting sponsors kind of became a challenge, but it became a competition among the 54 states and territories to see who could get their senators to sign on. So we had a goal that we would get 50 senators to sign on, and then everybody had to look at what we were doing with the seat on the Joint Chiefs. So we actually got 50 pretty quick. But you know what helped us more than anything else is the fact that they didn't vote on the NDAA, and they kept pushing it to the right, pushing it to the right. and waiting to vote, which gave us more time. Now, a lot of people thought that was a bad thing in the beginning. I always thought it was a good thing because it gave us more time to work the states and territories. So then after we got to 50, I saw Lindsey Graham one day. He said, you know, if we get 60, he said, then we kind of become bulletproof because we can override a veto, we can do a lot of other stuff, and we got the supermajority. So once we topped 60, I was over at a meeting one day with Senator Graham and Leahy, and they said, you know, if we got 70 or 75, you know, then nobody will keep us from bringing our amendments to the floor and doing all the other stuff that you do with all that. So then I think we got to about 69, 68 or 69 people who had signed on. Then everybody started to get worried about what was going on. And the professional staffers on the Hill, along with some of our friends in the Pentagon, decided that we should have a hearing. And that we would take this hearing and we would bring all of the members of the Joint Chiefs over to testify before the Senate Armed Services, and they would kill this bill. And we would have 7 against 1. It would be 7 people who were opposed to it. And there would be one guy that they were going to put on the spot that they didn't think would come over with actual information that talked about why we should have a seat on the Joint Chiefs. And it was probably, I think General Tonini alluded to this yesterday, probably one of the better days of my life. It became almost one of those deals where you had the members of the Joint Chiefs who were opposed to it just because they were opposed to it. They brought forth no factual information. It would be divisive among the services was the biggest thing that they would say. And then we got into the deal about, well, it would divide the budgets. The Chief of the Guard Bureau has no budget responsibility. We are responsible for a budget. And I'm trying to remember who it was, but we had kind of talked through all of that. You know, the chiefs of the services are not responsible for a budget. So they kind of did themselves in. And the Chief Staff of the Air Force made the comment about the budget, and then one of the senators asked him about his responsibilities with the budget, and he turned around and said, well, I'm not responsible for the budget. You know, those things are helpful when people are asking questions like that. And then there was, I'm trying to remember the other question that was asked to one of them. He said it was about the Marine Corps. They asked a commandant of the Marine Corps about being a member of the Joint Chiefs and how they were a service. And he said, well, we're a service. And then somebody got into the thing, I guess it was General Dempsey, about, well, only one person can carry the brand of the U.S. Army. So then we started the branding thing. And I'm sitting in the back. I said, you know, but there's only one group of people that can carry the brand of the National Guard Minuteman, and that's a guardsman. So those things kind of came out pretty clear. And then if you hadn't ever watched that, you should, if you don't watch the whole hour and a half or 2 hours, you should watch Lindsey Graham when Lindsey gets ready to do all of his questioning, and he turns to McKinley. Oh, incidentally, and McKinley is the only one of them responsible for a budget, and that came out loud and clear. The appropriation goes to the Guard Bureau and makes him responsible. So all of those things kind of came out loud and clear, and Lindsey Graham turns to, I think the real killer for those guys was when Lindsey Graham said, General, we're going to put you on the Joint Chiefs. These guys don't agree, but they didn't agree that we would have Goldwater Nichols. They didn't agree that we would have a SOCON. They didn't agree, regardless of what General Amos thinks, they didn't agree with putting the Marine Corps on the Joint Chiefs, and none of those things have turned out very bad, have they? So, you know, then it was kind of one of those deals, and the General Counsel, they brought the General Counsel over with them, and nobody could figure out why they brought him other than for him to talk about the statutes and whether things were legal to do these things this way. So he kind of talked around all the statutes and all the other stuff, and Senator Graham looks at him and he says, you know, he said, in 19, whatever it was, on a day, and he gave a day, Vice President Biden testified that this administration was in favor of making the Guard Bureau Chief a member of the Joint Staff. And then he says, and in President Obama's Roadmap for America, he is in favor of that. And he turns to the General Counsel and he says, have they changed their mind? Well, you should watch the facial expression. It tells you a lot. But he says, I'm only over here to talk about that's above my pay grade. But it was actually a rewarding experience. So then we get it passed through the Senate. And then all of you read all of the debate about whether they would authorize any amendments to the defense authorization bill. So then it became a contest between Levin and McCain because McCain wanted to do amendments, Levin didn't want to do amendments, and they couldn't figure out how to do amendments without allowing this amendment by this time we've got 71 co-sponsors because 3 more guys signed up as a result of the testimony. We didn't lose any sponsors, we gained 3 more. So we kind of get into it, and it's a good story how this thing goes because I'm going to give you the Kentucky side of this story, and that's kind of the build-up to this thing. I get a call one day from Senator Leahy's office, who had just talked to Senator Reed's office. And I don't know how many of you know anything about Senator Reed, but his legislative director is a Nevada Guardsman. So we have a pretty good end to Senator Reed's office. So Senator Reed was actually kind of for our bill, but he wouldn't go against Senator Levin. So they let the committees do all of this. So I get this phone call that says, okay, Senator Reed is willing to allow this amendment to come to the floor if the Republicans are willing not to bring all the amendments to the floor on detainees. Well, you know, that's a pretty tall order for even an old country boy from Tennessee to try to figure out how to do that. So I called my friend Ed Tonini. I said, Ed, here's the deal. We can get this amendment to the floor if we can get Senator McConnell to agree that we won't tie all of these other amendments to that. And in a one-day period between phone calls that Ed and I made, we got the leadership of the Senate to agree to allow this amendment to come up without all the other amendments. And nobody ever knew how we did that. And after the amendments came up and everybody voted on it, somebody asked Senator McCain, he said, well, how did they get this amendment through? And Senator McCain said, well, they won. Now, that was his total answer, they won. So I had a newspaper. So have you ever thought about what an accomplishment it is that we won? In spite of every member of the Joint Chiefs being opposed to this bill, the leadership of Senate Armed Services being opposed to this bill, the leadership of House Armed Services actually supported the bill, but the leadership of the Senate was opposed to it. The SecDef was probably, I would say, agnostic. He kind of took the approach of all the Pentagon insiders. But what you find is when you get a new SecDef and you get all of these unders, it's the guys who have been there the longest that write their testimony. It's the SESs. It's all the appointed other guys there. I could even tell you the 2 guys who wrote his testimony when he went to the Senate. And, of course, he turns it in as written testimony. Then it becomes his. So it's kind of interesting that we were able to do that. And what I say to everybody is we did that because the National Governors Association endorsed our bill, the VFW endorsed our bill, AMVETS endorsed our bill, the American Legion endorsed our bill. So all of these veterans organizations endorsed our bill. And so then it kind of became a no-brainer for the politicians out there to get onto the bill. So the few people who didn't, most of them had good reasons. Like Senator McConnell's guys told me that he will never endorse a bill that Levin is opposed to, but if they come to the floor, he would vote the way he wants to. So I kind of understand that. They're not going to go against their committee chairs because that's the guys that are out there. And then you've got a few others that would always vote along with the committee chairs. That whatever Senator Levin and McCain thinks that they should do, that's what they will do. The other thing that a part of that hearing was I talked to Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma. There were 2 or 3 guys who said before the hearing, I'm open to this thing. I don't know if I'm for it or against it. Immediately after the hearing, Senator Inhofe signed on as a co-sponsor for the bill, and he was one of them that said that. I saw Senator Inhofe a couple of days later, and he said, you know, he said, I truly told the truth. I wasn't for it. I wasn't against it. He said, but after listening to the testimony, with no good reason why not to, and he asked an interesting question from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force that the Chief kind of gave an answer that Senator Inhofe knew wasn't totally honest. And it had to do with engines for F-16s. And Senator Inhofe said, when we got to that point, and he didn't know the answer to the question on engines, he said, why should I expect to believe all the other things? So immediately after that, he signed on. So I say all of those for a reason. You know, we were willing to negotiate up front. At the end of the day, they asked us about negotiating, and I said, yeah, we'll take out everything except the chief and the joint chief. What about that? And they said, well, that's what we want to take out. And I said, you know, we'll support the vice. I said, you had the opportunity to do that up front because it was in the original bill, and they took it out over in the Pentagon. So we didn't make any deals with them. There were a few things that were dropped out of the bill, but the most important provisions of that bill, the chief on the joint chiefs, the 3-star, all of those things happen. And I will tell you what that does more than anything else. It lets everybody in Washington, D.C. understand the power of 54 states and territories that all work together. And I'll tell you that's important. And I'll tell you that's really important because of the challenges that we're going to have in this year's budget. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit. But I'll tell you some other things that came out of all of that. We got behavioral health care for IDT weekends, reemployment rights for Title 32. Now, NGB's got to get off their butt and implement that because there's a lot of, especially Air Guard guys, that have been gone from their employer for the 5 years, that this really helps. So we got to get an implementation to that where people that have left their civilian employment and the government employment for 5 years have longer than 5 years to restore. Everybody said Negria was going to die this year. Well, it wasn't too bad. $640 million for the Guard. MilCon, this will be the largest MilCon budget for the Army and Air Guard probably in the last 20 years, about $900 million. And then, you know, F-15 radars, $47 million for some other stuff. So it was actually a pretty good budget year for us. But then you look at where we are this year. And we're looking at this 400 and something billion over the next 10 years for DOD. You know, you hear what Secretary Panetta says, we're going to have more reliance on the Guard and Reserve. Well, I like that. I think that's the right thing to say. I think it's the right thing for the country to do that. And then you watch the services come out with their budget, and 3 services kind of do that. You know, there are no cuts in there for the Marine Corps Reserve, the Navy Reserve, and for the most part the Army Guard or Army Reserve. But then you watch the Air Force budget come out. We take out 2 C-5A wings. We take out 5 A-10 squadrons. We take out 1 more F-16 squadron. We take out all the C-27Js, and we take out, depending on whose numbers you use, somewhere between 60 and 80 C-130s. Now, guess what? How many C-5As the active duty guys got? How many C-27Js they got? They got a couple of A-10 squadrons, but they're going to keep those. You could keep all 5 of the Guard A-10 squadrons for the price of 1 of theirs and keep the capability for the country. And, you know, your tag alluded to that yesterday. It's about capabilities for the country. It's about doing what's right for the country, and we sometimes forget those things. The one thing that they have really, I think, misled everybody about is personnel cuts and how they're going to do those. If you look at the Air Guard cuts versus the Air Force versus the Air Force Reserve, at the end of the day, 60% of the personnel cuts come out of the Air Guard. Now, you've seen this number, 5,000. Well, that's a number that's a partially true number. When you see the real budget, I suspect that it's going to be more like 7,000, with a promise that you'll grow back 2,000 or 3,000 in the out years, the 15 to 18 POM, and out that way. Now, you know, we've seen promises before, and we only do a 2-year budget. And the one other thing that they hadn't talked about is the percentage of that in the Air Guard that is full-time. I think that number will be somewhere around 2,000 full-time Air National Guardsmen. And I don't know that there's a grow-back plan. You know, I'm obviously not privy to all of the budget. I just got a lot of good spy buddies in the Pentagon that we get these little numbers. And, you know, I think it's, I think the Air Force has purposely dropped a little bit along as they go to be able to follow up like in Iowa. They say, okay, your F-16 squadron's going away. But then they can go deal with one delegation and try to convince them what they're going to do back in Iowa as a replacement for that in the out years, and what they're going to grow back in the way of UAVs or whatever it is they're going to promise those guys. But if it's not in the budget, you probably are not going to get it. You know, how many of you guys remember BRAC? We remember what the replacement for BRAC was? It was A-10s for F-16s, and now they take those out. It was C-27Js for C-130s, and now they take those out. And now you've got all of those units sitting out there. So if you're sitting over in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they gave you an A-10 and said, this is a mission that's going to last till 2025, and now we're going to take them out, you know, in the next year or two, we kind of missed that mark by 12 or 13 years. And there is no program unit to go back into Fort Wayne. So, you know, you're sitting over there and you're the tag of Indiana, that's a pretty bad deal. So what I think we've got to do for the Air Guard, and I think this is the biggest thing that we do this year, we need to stop all the cuts for the Air Guard in this year's budget. We need to push all of those right until there is a budget that shows what the growback is and what the replacements are for A-10s, C-27s, 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever that number of C-130s are. And we don't leave these guys sitting out there with a promise in 15, 16, 17 and no mission to transition to that. And then we turn around and we tell some of these guys, okay, we're going to give you MC-12s. Well, there's a lot of difference in an MC-12 and an A-10. There's a lot of difference in the number of maintenance guys that are in those units. So they take these things out a little bit at a time, and if I look at the 120-30 here, a few years ago you had 12 C-130s. You know, pretty soon they'll have you down to 8, one at a time. And, you know, every time they take you down a little bit, they say, well, we're not going to take out the full-time manning and the structure that goes with that, but over time all that's going away. So we need to push it right. We need to kill the whole thing. What I have talked to the guys on the Hill about is, let's introduce legislation, save the people first, because if you save the people, they got to come back with something for the people to do. And I'm going to propose that we offer an amendment to something or a constitutional requirement that puts a floor on Army and Air Guard in strength and structure that they can't take us below. And I think if we do that, if we do that, we make them rely more on the Guard and Reserve. And at the end of the day, that's what this strategy should be about. You know, we should get beyond the Cold War bias where we grew this large Air Force and Army. And we should return to, as I think I heard you say yesterday, General Fogelman's model of a militia nation. You know, that's what we are, and we should return to that model. And I think if we do that, we won't be too bad. And, but what we got to do, and Ed knows how I feel, we can't take it one state at a time. We got to do this just like we did the Joint Chiefs. It's got to be 54 states and territories working together for the good of the whole. You know, if you're sitting in Tennessee, didn't come out too bad, my home state. Kentucky didn't come out too bad. Ed and I have had this conversation. But, you know, it's kind of like eating around the edges of the whole. But if we all stick together, none of us have to lose. And I think if we do that, we can actually win this battle to save what we all know is America's most efficient force, most cost-effective force. You know, and we don't continue to take our wings and squadrons down one at a time, a few at a time, and make them more inefficient, because where you got a ramp that should have 16 airplanes on it, or 12, or whatever that looks like the Air Force model, and you're sitting out here with 8. You hadn't seen them take theirs down to 8, have you, to be able to save your structure? So, you know, we got a lot of guys in Washington, D.C. that agree with us. There are a lot of think tanks that are coming out there and saying the way to save money is truly the Guard and Reserve. Now, any reservists in here? Good. And I was at ROA the other day, and the new executive director of ROA came to see me, and he wanted to talk about what we could do together. And I said, you know, we should work on benefits for our people together. I said, we should try to protect retirement benefits. We should try to work on health care benefits. We should do those things. I said, other than that, I don't see that we got much in common. And he said, why would you say that? I said, well, we just don't communicate with the same people. You guys are Title 10 guys. Our guys are Title 32. You know, those things are never going to equate. I said, I didn't see you guys sign on for the Chief of the Joint Chiefs. And he said, well, this didn't do anything for us. I said, well, I would submit to you it did, because you guys wanted to pass a law that allowed you to be accessible to the governor. Now you got somebody who represents you. Although I'll tell you a little story. You know, the Army moved all these Title 10 guys around for Hurricane Irene. They spent $15 million placing all these guys out there for the governors. Not one governor asked for one Title 10 guy. That's a good statement. That tells you the governor's confidence is in the Guard. So it came up at ROA the other day in public and made the newspapers up there. I support taking the Air Force Reserve and the Army Reserve and roll them back into the Guard. We should have done it years ago. There's more cost savings in rolling the Air Force Reserve back into the Air Guard than there is in the 10-year savings of what they're going to cut out of the Air Guard. Think about all the duplication of efforts. Did you know that the Army Reserve has got 50 more general officers than the Army Guard, and they're half the size? So think about the structure and the savings that go with all that. So I'm an advocate for that. And actually, I talked to my friend Senator Scott Brown the other day, and he's about to come out with some kind of legislation that requires DOD to do a study of why they wouldn't do that and how much money it saves and what the duplications of efforts are. And there's actually another senator who is willing to drop legislation that requires them to do that. So you're going to hear a lot about that. And as my friends in Washington say, if you work up there long enough, your friends come and go and your enemies multiply. So we're making a few enemies up there. But you know, that's not a bad thing sometimes. We just continue to march with that. So I would just challenge all of you, work with the 54 states and territories. Let's take this thing on as a nation, for the nation and what we think is right. And all of you guys in this room, you know, you're the guys who get it. But we got a lot of people out there who don't get it. And they don't communicate with their legislators. They don't communicate with their elected officials. They don't talk about what's right about the Guard. We got a whole group of about almost 600,000 peoples and families and retirees and all those others that we need to educate on the value of what professional associations do. We need to encourage membership. Now, I would never look at the commander of the 123rd and go tell your guys to all be members. But I'll tell you what, I heard a lawyer say this the other day, and I'll say it the way the lawyer said it. He said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a captain telling a captain he needs to be a member. He said, there's nothing wrong with a captain telling a colonel he needs to be a member. He said, the colonel just doesn't need to tell the captain. And he said, and there is absolutely nothing illegal to talk about why you are a member yourself. He said, you can do that. He said, you can talk about professional associations. So I think that's what we need to do. But more importantly, we need to be able to communicate with you. How many of you get all the emails that we put out once a week on everything we're working? You know, probably about 60% of you, but that means 40% of you don't get it. And if you don't get it, that means you probably don't communicate and correspond with your elected officials who are up here willing, and you heard your congressman this morning, he wants to fund the Guard. And I hear that every day. But I also hear every day that they don't hear from you. So you got to tell them what's important, because we're going to go through a hard time, not with just the Air Guard budget, but with the Defense Review Board of all the entitlement programs and all the others. And, you know, I draw Social Security. But we should make adjustments to Social Security. We should look at health care. But I'm not in favor of what McCain wants to do and tie the escalation clause is if health care goes up 40%, they can raise your premiums 40%. If we're going to have a COLA, you should peg everything to a COLA, and it can't go up bigger than the percentage that you get a raise. So those are kind of what I see as coming along that's going to be hard. I think the retirement thing and all the other stuff, I think we're pretty good shape on retirement. I don't think you're going to see that change. I still think that when we get beyond the next year or two with all these cuts that we'll be able to go back and retroactively fix the 90-day deal back to 2001. We talked about that with Senator Graham the other day. They all agree to that. Everybody agrees to it. We just got to figure out how to find the money. And in the big scheme of things, we're going to cut $487 billion in the next few years. The total cost to fix that is $1.2 billion. And that perpetuity, I mean, that's not a big deal in the big scheme of, you know, 1.5 trillion or whatever the numbers come out to be. I think our deficit now is 15 trillion or something. God, you could add another 1.2 billion to that. It's nothing. And but that's how we got here. There's 1.2 billion at a time. So there are a lot of people that want to do that. I think that we will be fine. I think we'll get that done. Come to Reno this year. I look forward to a conference out there. Our theme this year will be Hometown Force with a Global Reach. And if you think about where you've been, and I saw your slide yesterday, you got guardsmen all over the world. We touch people all over the world. There are people all over the world that want to be like us. And so what I say when I close every time, you know, you guys and gals represent everything right about America. And that's the reason I get up every morning and go to work feeling good about what I do, because I'm able to represent you in Washington, D.C., and I just need you to tell me what you want us to represent in Washington, D.C., because I work for you. Thank all of you, and God bless you.
Thank you, General Hargett. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to have you here with us today. On behalf of the National Guard Association of Kentucky and the Enlisted Association, we'd like to present you with a small token of our appreciation. Sergeant at Arms, please escort Major General Retired Hargett and Major General Tonini out of the chamber.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the joint business session. At this time, we'd like to take a moment to allow the members of the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of Kentucky to adjourn for their private business session. While they are departing with the members of the National Guard Association of Kentucky, please keep your seats. This portion will be followed by nominations, campaign speeches, and voting instructions.
Take your seats. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep moving on here as the Enlisted Association departs. Before I ask Colonel Retired Perry to come forward, as the nomination committee chair, I want to break from the schedule just a little bit and ask CW5 Steve Knight to the podium to walk us through a proposed new officer of the association position. Steve.
Everybody can go ahead and take their seats. Okay, what we need to start with, the reason we're a little bit out of schedule is we have a piece of business that we're going to need to vote on this morning before the elections. And as I'm standing up here as the appointed warrant officer representative by the board, last year at the first meeting of the board of directors for the association, they made an amendment change to the bylaws of the association to stay in line with the NAUGUS. We're pushing for the states to add this warrant officer representative to the elected board of directors. So our amendment basically reads that it follows along the same line as the vice president's elections. It's an elected position by the majority vote. It serves for 1 year.